Students used to ask me because I've been teaching what I've been teaching for about 40 years, and one of the questions they used to ask me is how I knew that what I was teaching wasn't just another ideology, right? Because the postmodern take is, well, all it is a plethora of power games, and there's no rank ordering approaches to the truth in terms of their ethical suitability, but that's not the game that you're playing. And
right, and obviously would not agree with that philosophy.
Why not?
The sort of moral relativism.
What's convinced you that that's not a useful way of approaching things?
Well, I think you can look at a given belief system and critique it as being likely to enhance or decrease enlightenment. Will any given belief system improve our understanding of the universe? Will we learn more things? Will we achieve a deeper understanding of physics? And
right, so that's grounded at least in part in a scientific framework from the sounds of it.
Well, I think there are facts about the world.
Yes, right.
There are things that are, let's say, extremely likely to be true versus less likely to be true. I think if one thinks in terms of probabilities about any given sort of axiomatic statement, then that's the right way to think about it. Now, some things are 99.99% to be true. You can run experiments, you can confirm them, and others perhaps have a low probability of truth, 1% likely to be true, or just using extremes here. But any given statement has, I think, should be thought of as having, unless it's a tautology, it should be thought of as having a probability of being true or untrue, or a probability of being relevant to an argument or not relevant to an argument. We're just talking about the basics of cogency here.
Yeah, well, so let me put a twist on that too. One of the things that really struck me about your public pronouncements in recent years was your insistence that we're in a natal crisis and that that's actually a problem.
Well, that's factually true.
Well, it depends on whether you think that the planet would be better off if it was depopulated. Right? I'm not an extinctionist. Line.
Yeah, Paul is a genocidal maniac, as far as I'm concerned. I think he's a terrible human being.
Yes, and he's never admitted that he was wrong. And he was unbelievably wrong. He made a famous bet. You know the bet.
I hate Paul. I got to be clear about that. I think he's terrible, and his books have done great damage to humanity.
Fine. I talked to a philosopher a while back who was an antinatalist, trying to get my finger on that. There was a recent research article published on this too. Antinatalists are much more likely to show dark tetrad traits. Machiavellian, psychopathic, narcissistic, and sadistic, because those first three weren't enough, right? And so those things are tightly aligned, especially the best predictor was psychopathy for being an antinatalist.
Sure.
Right. Well, and the psychopaths are very, very, very self-centered, right? They're like overgrown 2-year-olds, overgrown, aggressive 2-year-olds. That's not good. How did you start to understand that one of the fundamental ethical problems is different than a scientific problem? One of the fundamental ethical problems that's plaguing the West is this catastrophically low birth rate. And you started making public pronouncements.
Observing the numbers, I noticed this 20 plus years ago, that the trend in birth rates for really all countries past a certain level of economic development was trending to well below replacement, if not already below replacement. And if you extrapolate the curve, which one always has to be cautious about extrapolating any demographic curve, but so I always preface by saying, if these trends continue, most countries will dwindle into insignificance. They might completely die out. So,
in thinking about that in relationship to sacred images, okay, well, the sacred image of masculinity in the West is a crucifixion, but a man who's crucified. But the sacred image of a woman isn't a woman. The sacred image of a woman is a woman and an infant, right? It's a dyad and not a monad.
Sure.
Right. And in the Christian view, those two images, they vie for supremacy, right? Obviously, Christ is the superordinate image, but Mary as the mother of God is the female equivalent. And one of the things I've been playing with at an axiomatic level is the notion that unless the feminine is conceptualized as the combination of female and infant, then the culture has lost its attachment to the traditional sacred images and is probably on its way out.
I think there's an argument that when a culture loses its religion, that it starts to become antinatalist and decline in numbers and potentially disappear.
I've got a hypothesis about that. You tell me what you think about this. I've been working this out in my next book. which is coming out in November. It's an analysis of biblical stories, and in a way, it's an attempt to solve the alignment problem. Okay, so imagine this. Imagine that there's a unity of moral purpose that is conceptualized in the traditional writings as what should be put in the highest place. It's God, and in the final analysis, it's ineffable. But it is a fundamental unification, monotheism. Now, here's a hypothesis. When that collapses, two things arise to replace it. One is the striving for power, and the other is the untrammeled, what would you call it, the untrammeled dominion of hedonism, and especially on the sexual gratification side. It's like if there's no ultimate unity that's future and community oriented, that's predicated on sacrifice, you get a dissolution immediately into the next two contenders for domination. And one is, it's about me, buddy, and get the hell out of the way. And aligned with that is, not only is it about me, it's about me, what would you say, subjugated to my most base whims, because why would I want power except to do exactly what the hell I want whenever I want to? And part of the problem with the idea of people like Dawkins, so Dawkins and the atheists presume that...
I've had many conversations with Dawkins over the years.
You have, eh?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we're going to do a podcast together, which I'm very looking forward to. But I'm very curious about this issue, because his idea, and it's kind of an Enlightenment idea, is that we dispensed with the idiot superstition of the past, then everyone would become Baconian rationalists. And that seems...
Unfortunately not.
No, well, what seems to me to happen much more likely is that power and hedonism rise to take the place of what was holy, so to speak. Nietzsche warned about that when he proclaimed the death of God to begin with. He thought nihilism would also enter the realm, right? Sure. Nihilism, power, and hedonism as the triumvirate of replacement gods. And so I've been trying to puzzle out in this new book the way the biblical corpus is conceptualizing what's properly placed in the highest place. And it does, that's part of the reason I was asking you about the natalist issue, because you figured out 20 years ago, that's a long time before anybody had been talking about
longer.
This. Yeah, but and then you also did publicly proclaim it at a time when the moral insistence was all on the side of Jane Goodall's pronouncements that if we don't reduce the population of the planet dramatically, that the nature goddess is going to be upset, which is also a very, very old idea, not a very good one. So I'm very curious about your intuition there. That's a long time ago. And how did you cotton on to the fact that that antagonistic attitude towards birth that's embedded in our culture now was something that should be called out and that was pathological?
Well, I should perhaps go back to what is the foundation of my philosophy, because that I think helps build up to explain my actions. So when I was, I don't know, about 11 or 12 years old, I had somewhat of an existential crisis, because there just didn't seem to be any meaning in the world, like no meaning to life. Mm-hmm. And so I actually tried to read all the religious texts.
At that age?
Yes. I was a voracious reader as a kid. I obviously read the Bible. I read the Quran, the Torah, the various, but on the Hindu side. Just trying to understand all these things. And obviously, as a 12-year-old, you're not really going to understand these things super well. But I'm just
you understood it well enough to have an existential crisis when you were 11 or 12.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure
that's a start.
Does anyone have an answer that makes sense? And then I started getting into the philosophy books, and I read quite a bit of Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and which is quite depressing to read as a kid.
You might say that.
That's depressing as an adult, but and none of them really seem to have, to me, answers that resonated, at least to me. And but then I read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is really a book on philosophy disguised as humor. Mm-hmm. And the point that Adams tries to make there is that we don't actually know all the answers, obviously. In fact, we don't even know what the right questions are to ask. That's where he has this, if you read the book, the Earth is actually a giant computer to understand the answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? And comes up with the answer 42. And feel like, what does that mean? It says, oh, you didn't understand the thing that's going to take a computer far more powerful than Earth is to understand what question to ask.
Right.
That's